Ever flipped through Nan's recipe book? It's filled with handwritten recipes, recipe cutouts from magazines, classic ingredients, and the timeless dishes she loved to recreate. Each comforting dish on this list will rock that homemade flavor you love from Grandma's kitchen. Shepherd's pie is an American classic for many reasons besides just being the expected main course whenever you were heading on over to your grandparents'. It has the gravy, the meat, and mashed potatoes, which all combine together to make for a pretty comforting meal. The kind of dish that really takes the edge off, you know? Plus, grandmas would usually stick to the traditional recipe of using ground lamb. Differences between various kinds of lamb can make or break a good shepherd's pie, but our elders seem to have it nailed down to instinct. Combine an extremely solid taste with the fact that it was pretty cheap to make, with the most expensive part just being your protein, and you have a dish that can easily stand the test of time. If you were going on over to your grandparents for a casual Christmas or Thanksgiving visit, you may have been surprised to find that the dinner table was anything but casual, with delicacies like squash casserole. Creamy, crunchy, and filled with cheddar cheese and crackers, it is an all-time favorite that has been a staple of holidays and birthdays in many households. It was more popular to correctly reflect past tense in the 20th century, which explains why you would usually only find your grandparents making it, and back then, it would be very common to have this at potlucks. Some households still have it at theirs, but the trend has taken a bit of nosedive with the cracker and cheese combo taking a bit of a backseat. That only goes for if you are ordering a squash casserole from a restaurant though, because from the hands of any American granny, it was a dish impossible to resist. Speaking of cheddar cheese and nostalgic family meals, we cannot go without mentioning the ever-timeless King Ranch chicken casserole. This is definitely a dish for those people who feel like casseroles without meat or protein of any kind are missing something and do not feel as fulfilling. It would take about an hour to cook, but this did massive numbers in every neighborhood from Detroit to Texas. Especially more so in the South, it was a common practice for families to preserve their King Ranch chicken casserole recipes. The real strength of the dish was that you could use as much of the ingredients as you wanted, letting you double or even triple the dish, an advantage that Southern grandmas would very often use when they were in the mood to dote on their grandkids. Now, mashed potatoes and gravy need no introduction or explanation. Everyone and their mother's mother has had it. But did you know how good they were at making it? Receiving this dish from the chefs of generations ago was an entirely different experience in comfort. We do not know what spices they would mix, as each area had its own variations, with some even using mushrooms. Most popular was coriander, thyme, black pepper, and some oregano. The gravy would even put KFC to shame, if we are being completely honest. You just did not feel like eating from the outside when you had such fine dining available at home, and it was the perfect thing to get you back up only our feet from an exhausting day. Southern skillet cornbread has been a beloved memento of the South for many decades to the rest of the nation, but in the area, it is a tradition that goes back all the way to the 18th century. History books tell us that it comes from Native American cuisine, and it makes sense since a lot of Native American cuisine was very cost-effective. It is kind of everything you would want in a home-cooked meal, easy on the wallet, simple ingredients you can find at any nearby store, and little prep time, which means you can get your cravings fulfilled immediately. Plus, most cooks back then were so accustomed to it from a lifetime of making cornbread in these cast iron skillets that they could make it much faster than even an experienced cook. Guess experience counts for something, especially when you have 40 to 50 years of it, right? Pot roasts have been as much a part of the grand scheme of American culture and cuisine as anything else on this dish, and each area, state, and neighborhood has their own ideas of what one should look like. Were you the kind of kid that grew up on beef chuck roast, potatoes, a beefy broth, and carrots in your roast? Maybe you had boneless chuck roast, olive oil, bay leaves, and stuff like that instead. These are just the few variations you can expect to find when it comes to a good, well-done pot roast. The perfect party snack or a great one to pull out for an incredibly large family dinner with the in-laws and extended family, this is one dish that never fails to pull through, especially when a seasoned cook is behind it. A lot of the recipes from the times of our parents come from the Depression and from when America was recovering from it, But things like baked ziti is what they would whip up when they had a bit of money in their pocket. Some cooked ziti, ricotta cheese, eggs, and spaghetti sauce meant for an incredibly easy and amazing pasta. If you had the parmesan to spare, you could also sprinkle it on or add a melted layer as a topping. It did not take too long to make, and it tasted very different from regular pasta or spaghetti and meatballs, which was a recipe favored by moms more than grandmas. The real highlight of the dish is in the shape of the ziti, since they end up being these 25 to 30 centimeter tubes. When they turn into soft pasta, they become great for chewing and work really well with the cheese. Grandmas would always spice it up with some beef or duck here and there, though. Speaking of how different things were in their time due to the economical strife, one thing that got really popular back when your grandparents were still young was sausage gravy and biscuits. This might seem like an outlandish combo to us today, and we admit it takes a bit of getting used to, but the magic is all in the gravy. Biscuits and gravy are already something Americans have been pretty accustomed to eating, especially in the 20th century, but innovation is one of the finer points of the country, and culinary matters are no exception. People eventually found out that using pork sausage crumbles enriched the gravy and made it irresistible, especially if they were smoked. Usually biscuits like jumbo buttermilk ones make for a great side to the dish, but even the gravy alone was worth eating on its own. There are some baking challenges that only your grandmother is equipped for, and making the pinnacle of brown buttersweet potato pies was one of them. Seriously, even bakeries and fancy eateries have struggled to nail every aspect of a pie, but for most home chefs in the United States, it seems to be just another Tuesday with the oven. You take a flaky pie crust with a velvety potato filling that is usually topped off with whipped cream, but most older cooks preferred maple syrup as that was what they grew up with. Just a bit of dark brown sugar would elevate this dish into the perfect dessert, though it would often steal the show entirely on its own. The thing is built to make your mouth water, and we mean looks-wise too, since the brown and caramel hues of the pie just make it all the more enticing. Have you ever heard of this one before, and would you try it? Beef stew is a nostalgic childhood dish nobody can go without. Fresh pearl onions and a broth made out of the beef stock were the tricks to an unbeatable stew that is sorely missed every time you eat one that is not your grandma's. The modern-day beef stew involves an entire list of 10 ingredients for better readability that feels more like an overdone broth mixed with a lot of toppings. But that is because beef stews have gone a bit out of fashion unless you are in the South. This is also because beef stews today are usually made with red wine as a base. But the hearty and vigor-filled ones of your childhood were all about keeping it simple with vegetables and a solid cut of beef. Flaky buttermilk biscuits are all well and good if you buy them as a snack at your local mart, but you have not tried a buttermilk biscuit until you get a veteran baker to make these for you. Who better than family? And what family member is more skilled in baking than your trusty grandmother? Well, not all of them cook or bake, but the nation has more than its fair share of grandma's creamy buttermilk recipes floating around the internet and cookbooks from dozens of years ago. Practice always makes perfect, and most home chefs learned that the great secret of an impeccable buttermilk biscuit is to not overmix so that you avoid flat and tough biscuits. These were extremely common as snacks to give to children in the family during holidays and were the perfect pairing for a gift basket. Here is a dish that you have probably heard of one too many times but never gotten enough of: meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Let's just say that comfort cooking really does not get much higher than this, nor more relaxing. Sitcoms, movies, and comedies across the decades that depict middle-class families always have somebody serving up a killer meatloaf, and it is for good reason. Our generation's parents always grew up eating a hearty meatloaf with a side of perfectly mushy soft potatoes, so it is no wonder that they kept the custom going. Today, mashed potatoes have an 85% popularity rate, which even beats hamburgers and cheeseburgers. You would think that those would be America's top one, but it seems nothing can beat Grand's meatloaf classics. A recipe that is largely forgotten right now but still made some noise back when it was really popular in the 20th century is shrimp and grits. The secret to an incredible plate of these was all in the milk, butter, and cheddar cheese. Depending on the quality and how you handled it, You would ever have shrimp that had not really absorbed the flavor or the best seafood experience you could hope to have at home. Luckily, over many long years, the home cooks of our nation perfected the recipe and kept passing it down, one generation to the next. Some chopped bacon for a smoky flavor, or sausage drippings were also really popular picks for older chefs to run with. Grits would be made with dent corn and often boiled, then mixed with the butter and milk. How did your family make these, if they ever did? Collard greens and ham hocks have been a combo that has very faithfully stood the passing of time, and we think it is partly due to all the different takes on it that families keep coming up with. You hear cabbage and your heart does not exactly burst with excitement, but collard greens is another story. Pair it up with smoky ham hocks and you have yourself a meal on a budget like no other. A ham hock itself is a portion of bone with connective tissue and some meat that is covered in fat and skin, and the other name for these is pork knuckles. With some sweet onions, garlic, and chicken broth, this was a recipe that would give any other dish a run for its money, and it was great for your diet too. Gotta make sure your grandkids grow up right and proper after all. Twice cooked potatoes are firmly a thing of the past now, but that does not mean this video cannot serve as your inspiration to bring back this hit, which was especially popular with grandmas all around the country. Like we said with the previous dish, something being good for your health and tasty does wonders for its appeal, and Granny's knows how to get the best of both worlds. Double cooking always had a benefit because it made them a lot easier to digest and increased their starch. They would prick the potatoes, cook, cool, then cook again before topping it off with green onions and bacon. An incredibly American idea, but also an extremely flavorful one, so do not hesitate to give this one a go. Want to go for another odd dish that brightens the mood up at parties, holidays, and feasts alike? Broccoli cheese casserole was the American populace's answer to concerns about how the diet of kids these days just does not have enough green at them. The age-old question of how do we make broccoli taste as good as a cheeseburger still stood pretty firm though, and one genius in the 1800s had the bright idea of mixing broccoli into a casserole. As you must be quite familiar with by now, America tends to add cheese to anything it can see, so it does not take a lot to figure out how this came to be. A creamy sauce with fresh broccoli florets and cheese crackers are a tried and tested 1900s combo. If you ever found yourself wondering what people did to celebrate fall back in the days of your grandparents, then wonder no longer, because we have the answer. Dishes like butternut squash mac and cheese fulfilled that craving of comfort food that the fall season tends to bring, while also being new and fresh enough to keep things interesting. Mac and cheese is already known for being pretty creamy texture-wise, but the squash just takes that and amplifies it tenfold. Also, it sneaks in some sweetness in there too, which really brings the entire dish full circle. This dish is a favorite of people who are in their 40s or 50s, and they would always go overboard with the squash. The difference in this dish is that it does not require you to make a roux with flour and butter and uses pureed roasted squash as the base for the cheese sauce. It actually works a lot better than regular mac and cheese, so if you have ever had Grandma make this for you, send her a thank you text. To really appreciate the dedication to the bit it takes to make a fantastic heirloom tomato pie, you need some backstory on what heirloom tomatoes really are. See, these are special fruits that are open-pollinated and have been passed down for some 40 to 50 years across many generations of a family. Before they were commercially introduced in 1940, that was the way to do it at least, and a batch of these would often be used to whip up one of the best tomato-based dishes you will ever have the pleasure of tasting. We guess it takes the term generational food to an entirely new, literal level. The tomato flavor given by these is acidic and sweet, and there are very few seeds. The sensation and taste has often been compared to pineapples before due to how explosive the flavor is. Where would we be a nation without bread pudding? Especially the slow-cooked variant. Now, this dish is already well known for its soft and spongy consistency, which is part of why it has the name bread pudding. But slow cooking takes it up several notches. If you ever wondered what eating a cloud might feel like, we think this is the closest humanity will get to the experience. Using the bread as a cereal base and being slow cooked for around 2 to 3 hours, grandmas would often add an assortment of different nuts and spices to really get this dish shining as bright as it cold. Some raisins here, a touch of cinnamon and plump there, plus the freshest French bread you could get your hands on. All of it made for an incredible experience that made this the perfect brunch option to go for. And if you were not feeling brunch, it worked just as well as a breakfast or even late-night post-dinner snack. Let's end our tour of the most famous dishes that our grandparents would prepare with one last trip to the South. And this one will take us to some pinto beans with ham. Specifically with ham hocks, as you may remember from earlier on. Dried pinto beans cooked on a stove to soak up all the flavor of the ham bone before they would go on to take every drop of goodness from the broth. Some fresh cornbread was the side of choice for this dish because when you dipped it with cornbread in specific, the harmony of flavors was just unbeatable. This dish was popular among our grandparents not only because it was budget-friendly, but also because a bag of beans could potentially serve up to 6 to 8 people. It was one of those things that really got you by the week, especially when finances would be tight. Well, that about wraps it up for this list of Grandma's favorites to put on the dinner table before her beloved kids and family. Like, subscribe and let's keep these memories alive.